Hi guys, my name's Connor. I'm a science fiction, politics, and philosophy nerd, Marine Corps and law enforcement veteran, never Trump Republican, although that's becoming increasingly difficult by the day. Today we're going to be watching one of our favorite annoying liberal debate bros, Pisco, and he's going to be doing some reflections on his recent debates on Tim Pool and PrimeCayes. The reason why I'm interested in this content is because he is an excellent debater, despite being incredibly frustrating to debate. And yeah, let's check it out.
Very clearly, I think people who use the term deserve your vote, or she needs to earn my vote, or she deserved to lose, I believe that to largely be either confusion or weasel language. When you say you don't owe anyone your vote, well, what do you mean by that? If what you mean is legally you don't have an obligation to vote for someone, then that I would say I agree. You don't owe anyone your vote in the sense that you are not legally bound. You haven't made a commitment that is enforceable. If the other sense is like, do I have an ethical obligation to vote for someone? Then I think you do owe her your vote because you owe the most viable, in my opinion, like the least harmful, viable candidate your vote. Hey, folks.
Unironically, that's the crux of the argument. Part of the reason why we're not watching the PrimeCayes Pisco debate, like I said, they're friends. So they probably take a little while to warm up and get spicy and all that kind of stuff. And that's the crux of the issue, man. I didn't vote for Kamala because I like Kamala. Kamala's annoying as shit. She has an annoying laugh. She's from Barbados. I don't think she has any biological children. She's a California state attorney who was simultaneously like tough on weed and truancy, but then flip-flopped into, you know, self-righteous pro-BLM bullshit during 2020. Her 2019 primary campaign, in my opinion, was a progressive disaster. Like, I actually think that is part of the reason why she lost, is because they just used her 2019 campaign stuff against her. So yeah, like Kamala is not anywhere close to an ideal candidate for me. But at the same time, I knew, maybe on an instinctive level, maybe I didn't have all the evidence for it, but I knew that Trump was an incompetent, dumbass, R-slurred, ephebophilic pedophile who was boys with Jeffrey Epstein, who was going to tank the economy and kill people unnecessarily overseas in ways that were incompetent and stupid. So, you know, it's like, I have a drawing for this. I have a drawing for this. Look at this. Look at old Connor. Old Connor coming in clutch with the drawing. So easy. No, not the socialism. Not the thumbnails. Nope. And don't you love that I can flip through my shit? So here we go. Here's all of Trump's sins. False elector scheme trying to overthrow the government. 14 million preventable deaths from disease due to closing USAID and PEPFAR with no plan. Ethnic cleansing of Gaza supported by the United States, turning Gaza into Atlantic City. Backstabbing Ukraine. Mass deportations effing with the Constitution, or construction and mass deportations effing with the construction industry and agricultural industry. 80s and 90s had a best friend who sex trafficked 14 to 17-year-old girls and was credibly accused of raping said girls, is now covering up the pedophile ring. Detaining and deporting people without due process, glorifying the torture of detained people in Sacut and Alligator Alcatraz, torturing asylees, Kilmar Abrego Garcia and Andre Hernandez, ignoring court orders to restore due process and justice, threatening Greenland, Denmark, and Canada for no discernible benefit, tariffs against allies, passing on cost to consumers, pretending it's a win, rug pull crypto scam of supporters. I forgot about that. I actually forgot about that until I pulled this up. Followed by corruption via crypto, killing a corruption case to get support for mass deportations with Eric Adams. These are the things that weren't necessarily foreseeable, but were predictable within a Trump administration. And Kamala Harris was going to do none of this shit. She was going to be a normie Democrat politician. And listen, normie Democrat politicians are annoying. They're self-righteous. They're douchebags. I totally understand why they're unappealing to vote for, but they don't pull anywhere near the amount of destructive bullshit that we knew Trump was going to pull. So yeah, so I have a drawing for that. And sorry for I'm so grumpy today. I'm going to apologize to VOD viewers. I'm so grumpy today. I spent an hour talking to Chad about why I'm so grumpy. But fuck Trump. Fuck Trump. Fuck MAGA. Anybody who's sweeping for him after this pedophile bullshit, fuck them all, dude. Fuck them all. Not literally, metaphorically.
Please like, comment, and subscribe. And make sure to check out my newsletter. Information is in the description. On Friday, I had another debate with Tim Pool, and he always likes to organize some help.
And sort for $2. Thank you for the stream. I parasocially love you. Thank you for being here.
For his side, to have additional conservative people to lean on, to maybe be a contrast to. He did it previously in each one of the appearances that I've made, starting with Good Logic, then Will Chamberlain plus Alex Stein, then Matan plus Gavin McInnes plus Alex Stein, and now with this, I don't remember his name, Joel guy, and this British person that they brought on to discuss the deployment of the National Guard. I always enjoy being outnumbered. I think optically it looks good for the liberal whenever they're outnumbered like that, and it gives me a lot to like push off of and to make like a useful contrast. And oftentimes there are disagreements that you can utilize between Tim Pool and the people he is bringing on. My strategy in that discussion was I expected him to bring up some like crime statistic or to bring up some anecdote, which he did. He brought up the story from like Chicago, where apparently,
which was so lame, by the way. For those of you who didn't watch, so he's talking about his Tim Pool debate, and Tim Pool was like, Chicago had such a serious crime problem for such a long time, and what they did is instead of helping the black people, they just destroyed the Section 8 housing and moved all the black people out. Well, what he neglected to mention, which somebody, take this with a grain of salt, it's all on the internet, right? Somebody fact checked that yesterday. All the Section 8 housing was destroyed because it was basically condemned shitty old housing, but they're rebuilding new Section 8 housing. So they will be moving in poor people from, disadvantaged communities back into it once construction is complete. So again, like Tim Pool, just taking an example, Democrats bad, misconstruing the facts, acting like he's more morally righteous than Democrats, but then simultaneously like he's voting for somebody who just doesn't even give a shit about Section 8 people. What is it? And this was in reference to the National Guard getting deployed, by the way. So the National Guard is currently getting deployed to the hood. We talked about this yesterday. They're getting deployed to Chicago. But what's going to happen is they're going to show up for 6 months. Yeah, sure, homicides are going to drop, right? Because nobody wants to get into a gunfight with the National Guard. However, what's going to happen when the National Guard leaves? Are you going to fix like broken schools? Are you going to fix broken families? Are you going to, stop the rampant drug use? Are you going to end drug trafficking in the urban center? No, you're not going to fix any of that shit. So the second that the National Guard leaves, then you're fucked again. So Cacode says apparently Bill's in a painting on the wall wearing a dress. So, well, Cacode, that painting was of, I think it was Bill Clinton wearing Monica Lewinsky's dress, which was the infamous dress that had a semen stain on it that got him in trouble with Congress because he cheated on his wife with Monica Lewinsky. And lied about it. And which is something my parents were upset by, which is so funny in retrospect, looking at Trump's behavior. And then they also had a painting of George W. Bush with the Twin Towers playing with airplanes. Like he was playing with Jenga blocks that looked like the Twin Towers and they had airplanes. And people were like, look, it's Israeli Jewish foresight that 9/11 was an inside job and George Bush did it. That was like the accusation. George Bush, Jenga, 9/11 painting. But this painting was done after 9/11. So look, it's George Bush with a paper airplane next to two knocked over Jenga stuff, right? And then here's the Jeffrey Epstein. Then there's Bill Clinton wearing the Monica Lewinsky dress. These are like shit posts as far as I know. Okay. This is a dress, or excuse me, this painting was probably purchased by Jeffrey Epstein to fuck with Bill Clinton, because Bill Clinton was coming to his house to fuck underage teenagers. And then same way, this artist painted George Bush doing 9/11 as like a political satirical shitpost, but it was obviously created after 9/11. And I don't think that artist had any specific insight into 9/11. It was just like a political shitpost. So I'm not going to use that as like additional evidence that George Bush definitely did 9/11 unless we get more substantive evidence. Anyways,
they tore down a neighborhood, and he presented this like false dichotomy that I have to choose between bulldozing all the black people's homes or a bunch of National Guard people picking up trash.
Oh yeah, look at this. That's where black people used to live. Look at all these houses. They fucking destroyed, and because instead of saying we want to deal with the crime, they went in, evicted all the black people, and ripped their homes down. There's not going to be a single Democratic politician who's going to come out and tell you because crime got so bad, we flattened the black community. They're not going to say that.
Yeah, but
they're going to say
because it's a fucking lie, Tim. It's a fucking lie. Allegedly. Okay, allegedly. Take everything I say with a grain of salt. They're rebuilding Section 8 housing. Fire W says, so you kind of like the full equal opportunity, more welfare, and more government intervention to the economy while maintaining capitalism, so you prefer mixed Nordic social market economy? Maybe, but we need to talk about like Nordic culture and how to inculcate a industrious and productive and mildly socially conservative culture that doesn't celebrate hard drug use. Okay? That's where liberals and progressives, lose me. No offense. I know I have a few alcoholics and a few hard drug addicts in chat who are recovering, but I don't think that we should celebrate your addiction. Okay. We should give you off ramp. If you're an addicted person, we should give you off ramps to come back into society.
In this game of whataboutism, when we're like, okay, the Democrats had a bad policy on crime. By the way, they've had multiple bad policies on crime over the course of decades and decades and decades.
it's not whataboutism. It's quite simple. The Democrat policies, the liberal plans, the plans you're presenting, and the counter that you're making to Donald Trump has failed.
And that couldn't, I think, have been a better thing for him to start with, as far as I'm concerned.
Ooh, okay. Fire W says, do you like Singaporean and German style social market economy and general counterpoints politics? Let's say Singaporean. Because, sorry, this real quick memes. I know we're supposed to be getting through content and I'm all schizophrenic and ADD. But again, number one, it's my stream. So I love you, but fuck you. Number two, this is important. Singapore does have a robust welfare state. But if you throw gum on the sidewalk, a cop with a fucking cane will walk up and beat the shit out of you and give you a $500 fine. Singapore has a really complex economy with high taxation and high government regulation. But, if you're like a homeless person doing heroin on the subway, a cop is going to come beat the shit out of you and incarcerate you in an insane asylum. So yeah, I would unironically say Singaporean civic nationalism is probably my ideal model. Now, I think it has some problems, obviously. Like they don't have true free speech. They prohibit any criticism. I think you're allowed to criticize the government. I don't think you're allowed to criticize anyone's like religion or ethno-religious makeup or race. I think that's a little too Orwellian for me. It's a little too thought policey for me. But in general, yeah, like Singaporean, that kind of like center-right authoritarian capitalist shit against that like hug a thug, let's just give you endless social services so you can escape your own depravity. Yeah, I would infinitely choose Singapore over the Nordic model. Absolutely.
I think that dichotomy is so preposterous. It's so ridiculous that anyone would accept that in a discussion about whether the National Guard deployment was justified.
My dog costed 1,500 euros. Don't be telling me that shit and then not saying it in the super chat, Hans Mayer. You're German? You're working in a vibrant German economy? You have a $2,000 dog? Make it rain, son. Make it rain.
Or not, that we would have to choose between an illegal or unjustified bulldozing of people's homes and the National Guard deployment or military deployment. That is, like, to me, self-evident.
Sorry, I know I keep pausing. I'm fucking up the flow of the stream, but, whatever. Bob Smith, I need to congratulate. He says, about to check in for my first part-time job as a crossing guard while searching for my real first-time job out of college. I've been working on personal projects and applications while listening to the stream. Bob Smith, God bless you. Godspeed in following seas. I hope you beat the shit out of every interview that you're in, and I hope you get a fantastic job that pays well, that you actually enjoy doing.
Absurd. Now, I've been told that what he said about that Chicago neighborhood isn't even true, but it doesn't even like really matter for present purposes. Like just the fact that he is trying to contrast the National Guard deployment with some like other thing that happened in his past, I think it's self-evidently ridiculous. And I think that any like fair-minded audience will see the kind of gamesmanship that he's playing by contrasting those two different like very disparate policies against each other and trying to make a conversation that's like specifically about the deployment of the National Guard on like your broader solutions for crime. And so I thought that was a good look. Additionally, I think that like bringing on some insane Christian nationalist who basically says, what did he say there? He goes, all trans people are ticking time bombs designed to kill Christian children.
But what do you think about saying that transgenders can't buy guns?
Yeah, I think that that's ridiculous, right?
Why?
Because the
As somebody with trans community members, I'm genuinely like here's where I'm at on trans people having guns, okay? I've met beautiful, integrated, soulful, intelligent trans people, okay? They're fantastic human beings and I wish them Godspeed. Not only that, it seems like they're at risk in disproportionate threat of hostility from civilian society, where if somebody sees that they're visibly trans, they are likely to be verbally or even physically accosted just through virtue of who they are as a person. And I think that those people absolutely need, should, could, will have the right to defend themselves, 100%. However, I've also met trans people who are pre-transition, during transition, not so much post-transition, to be honest, who are figuring it out. They're figuring out their identity. They're figuring out their dosage. They're figuring out whether or not transition even makes sense. They're figuring everything out, and they're riddled with like anxiety and depression and family issues and social issues, and sometimes they have like drug issues and all that kind of stuff. And I would say like maybe a gun for self-defense or an assault rifle for the impending civil war should not be your priority. Maybe your priority should be like figuring out who you are as a person, getting your anxiety under control, figuring out what your medical regimen is, figure out whether or not you're even transitioning or if transitioning is appropriate for you, and then completing that process before you get a gun. Okay? Just advice. Same advice that I would give to any cis person is handle your shit first. Having a gun is a responsibility. You need to handle that responsibility first. Hasbar says, does Connor mean never Trump or never MAGA in general, or is that one of the same and never Trumpers? Well, I associate MAGA with the cult of Trump, Hasbar. I really do. I really do. So, you know, we could argue the details of the MAGA movement versus the Trump cult if you want to, but for me, those are the same.
Second Amendment protects people's individual right to own guns, right?
Yeah, but what if they're
Based. Hold on. Hold on. Did we just get Pisco?
about saying that transgenders can't buy guns?
Yeah, I think that that's ridiculous, right?
Why?
Ooh, please. I want to hear it. I want to hear that. This is going to be so good for me. This is going to heal my soul.
Because the Second Amendment protects people's individual right to own guns, right?
Yeah, but
Oh, that's so good. Hearing a liberal make a pro-gun argument is like, that's Kino.
but what if they're a biochemical engineered ticking time bomb to kill Christian children?
That is also, I think, a nice contrast with myself. And then he being unable or unwilling to like condemn that system of government, that theocracy, or at least to kind of make a false equivalence. Like, you want this shit, you want to bulldoze black people's homes, and he wants a Christian theocracy across the whole country where we're like,
Yeah, and it's like, no, I don't want to bulldoze black people's homes, dumbass. Yeah, dude, Pisco's so right on for this.
outlawing blasphemy. Who can really decide between those two things? Again, once it, like, you know, mischaracterizing my position on housing and what I want to do to various different populations. So I thought that was all well and good. I think always when I have these conversations with Trumpers, I start with, do you care whether or not the policy at issue, whether it's deporting Kilmar, whether it's getting rid of Mahmoud Khalil's green card, whether it's deploying the National Guard or Marines and military, whether that is legal or not? That's how I always start with, because I think it's a great indicator of where these people's minds are at. In the case of Joel, he literally repeated the thing that Napoleon said or whatever. He who saves a country commits no crime or doesn't break a law. And that, again, I think is wonderful.
Which is
and
so
when they get back to those
fascistic.
hypotheticals, like, well, you would break the law sometimes, yes, but we're talking about in the American context. We're talking about a threshold within the American context. And I think that all makes them look like authoritarian goons. I always will go back to the use of specific terminology in one case versus another. In the case of like the insurrection application of that term and rebellion, where he's like, oh yes, the burning of the Waymos and like throwing some rocks at ICE officers, that's definitely an insurrection and rebellion because it was so organized. It was really organized. And so unlike January 6th, which was very unorganized, that the LA protest riots, though, that was a rebellion, but not Jan 6 because it wasn't organized enough. Don't you know?
Dude, they're just liars. Dude, I hate to say it, man. I always try to steel man somebody, but they're just tribalist liars. Like seriously, there's absolutely no way. If you were like an intellectually honest person, you would absolutely say, hey, January 6th, fucked up, rebellion, trying to overthrow the country, et cetera, et cetera. LA riots, throwing bricks at ICE officers is probably not the best way to achieve our goal. But Hasbar says, lol, Connor will call Trump a pedophile, but is extremely hesitant when it comes to Destiny. Yeah, that's because Destiny isn't accused. And by the way, Hasbar and I have DMs and we're cordial, so I'll try not to freak out or spurg. But that's because Steven's never been accused of, so far anyways, never been accused of repeatedly sex trafficking 14 to 17-year-old girls in order to have sex with them, knowing that they're underage and they're committing a grievous crime. Hasbar. Whereas Jeffrey Epstein is like the most prolific sex trafficker who moved in like heavy circles for the past, like, I don't know what, like 2 or 3 decades. He died in 19 under the Trump administration. Let's go ahead and look at I'll just go to my profile. Let's go to replies. Here is something that was turned over from the Epstein estate. Okay, Hasbar. Voiceover. This is a note from Donald Trump to Jeffrey Epstein. And before you say the signatures don't match, yes, there's plenty of signatures from Donald Trump that are identical. And this is from Jeffrey Epstein's estate. So unless your contention is that Jeffrey Epstein, in order to screw over his friend after his death, fabricated a letter in order to screw over Donald Trump, then this thing's 100% legitimate. It was turned over from the Jeffrey Epstein estate to Donald Trump, or to Congress, okay? Voiceover. There must be more to life than having everything. Donald. Yes, there is, but I won't tell you what it is. Jeffrey. Nor will I, since I also know what it is. Bear in mind, Jeffrey Epstein, one of the most prolific, ephebophilic, pedophilic sex traffickers of the past 3 decades. Donald, we have certain things in common, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, yes, we do, come to think of it. Donald says, enigmas never age. Have you noticed that question? Jeffrey says, as a matter of fact, it was clear to me the last time I saw you. Donald says, a pal is a wonderful thing. Happy birthday, and may every day be another wonderful secret. Donald Trump. And then look at this. The good news is that she has hips. That's the good news about the silhouette drawing that Donald Trump meant, is that, you know, at least she has hips. But at the same time, look at this. Look at these breasts. These tiny, tiny, tiny breasts. And you're telling me that it's an accident that Donald Trump was friends with the most prolific ephebophile sex trafficker for fucking decades, 80s, 90s, and thousands. Hung out with him, hung out at his penthouse, knew that he liked to party with young girls, knew that his modeling agency recruited young girls for sex acts, that some of those girls have said that they have personally had sex with Donald Trump, that they've given him hand jobs and blow jobs, and it's all a fucking accident? Are you serious? Meanwhile, the person that you're comparing him to, Steven, who, by the way, this behavior is repugnant. And you're like, Connor never covers this. Connor always goes soft. Always goes soft on Steven. No, I don't. I just descriptively say what's accurate. I have drawings for you. This is the moral difference between take your time, because go watch another go watch another stream. Take your time. But this is my moral axioms. This is DGG's moral axioms. Okay? We are different. Okay? We are fundamentally different in all of these things. Then I went through, I don't know, it took me like 30 minutes to draw this, a breakdown of what I think our society and legal system prescribes when it comes to sexual maturity, and also what I believe is appropriate for sexual maturity. Then I talked about the social dynamics. I talked about Christian forgiveness. I talked about like IRL events versus these personalities that are engaged in degenerate sex bullshit. No, fuck you. Not okay. That's too far. Sorry, Hasbar. Not fuck you, but fuck the sentiment that I have gone soft or in any way incorrectly described what Steven is accused of. I've spent hours on this shit. And not only have I spent hours on this shit, but I can articulate very specifically how Donald Trump is a worse fucking human being than Stephen Bennell II. Stephen Bennell thought he was messaging an 18-year-old sex worker. Totally stupid, totally gooner, totally bad. Hate that shit. Think it's fucking degenerate. He shouldn't fucking do it. But she lied about her age. Until we get different evidence where Steven is like, oh, dang, you're actually 17. That's awesome. Let's continue to sext. Until we get that evidence, that's all you got. Versus Donald Trump being a fucking friend, best friend with the most prolific ephebophilic sex trafficker of the past 3 decades and writing this creepy fucking note with a 15-year-old girl's body talking about how, well, I can have everything, but I want something else, and it's a little secret that you and I share. This would tank any Democrat. If this was any Democrat, any liberal, any progressive, any rhino Republican, you would be shitting blood. But because it's the leader of the MAGA movement, you're like, oh, but isn't Steven bad too? I'm just going to go ahead and call bullshit on that, okay? I'm going to call bullshit on that. Lethal Lance says, yeah, but Kamala has an annoying laugh. I agree. Input Output says, do you have any idea how actually to care for that wild animal? No, I don't. Kay says, you should have seen Tally and Soy Pills debate Speakeasy and some other guy last night about sexism in Raging Tomato. Nice to see Tally side with Soy, but those guys were insufferable. That sounds like good content, actually. We'll watch the Vince Wilson versus Andrew Wilson debate today, just for the sake of staying consistent with the title of the video. But please remind me, Kay. I'm going to add that to the top. I think I had the gun stuff. at the top. Where is the well-regulated militia part, even if you mean trained? I want to do another gun stream sometime soon, but I also want it to be relevant algorithmically, so I don't know how to do that. Accidents and mass shooting and terrorist attacks. I want to talk about how I would handle these things. I want to do some more painter points in reference to those topics, but let me go ahead and write this one down too. You said Tallybots, friend of the channel Tallybots on Raging Tomato. I'm going to add that to my list. All right, I'm going to go get a refill of tea. I'm going to let Pisco keep you company.
No, I saw like a grandma walk in and they charged her
back.
as though that fact were related to whether we're going to use specific terminology for one event versus another. I think that's a good look as well. It shows the inconsistency, the hypocrisy. He's quite willing to call something a rebellion the minute Trump does. He's quite willing to call it an insurrection the minute Trump does. And anytime there's a specific opportunity to press him on that, I will take it, because Trump is essentially running his administration off of emergencies, executive orders, and unlocking authorities based on like certain prerequisites such as insurrection, invasion, rebellion, that stuff. And so anytime the administration can be needled on their hypocrisy, be Jan 6, I'm going to do it. Other issues that came up, the British guy, was I a little rude to him by saying, listen, you're from the UK, you don't know shit about the First Amendment? The reason I brought that up was specifically because he was suggesting that whether you wave a flag of another country, that is the determining factor whether something is an insurrection or rebellion. I'm like, dude, you don't know jack shit.
Mexicans were waving their own flags inside your country and declaring that they were going to take over a state for the race. I think that probably qualifies.
Yeah, you know, it's funny that we have a UK person coming here to talk to me about the First Amendment, not my country.
Hold on.
That's why
in this country, we have a right to expression. And also, by the way, I think it's even
he's got you there.
It's even extra funny. I just want to finish this and I'll let you finish. So it's even extra funny because the whole purpose that our constitutional structure and history is so fearful of standing armies has to do with British deployments of the military in the United States for like the Boston Massacre, etc. And so, yes, we don't need your lessons on military deployments or the First Amendment.
Okay, there's no need to be petty. I was actually going to ask you a question in very good faith, so I would rein that in, please.
On this issue of the National Guard deployment or the military deployment, we were trying to get away from like your military standing armies deployments in the American context when we had the Declaration of Independence and charged that as one of the major crimes of the British Crown, which justified secession. So I thought that was a nice little opportunity. And he was kind of left with just kind of complaining about my being rude to him for the rest of the conversation and was essentially a non-factor. I think anytime someone is focusing on the meta of the conversation, that looks good for me, I think. They look like they're complaining, like they're whining. Tim Pool was interrupting, I would say, more than usual. And I think that he was more frustrated and guarded than usual. I sensed that. Another, I think, fantastic moment was near the end where he's like needling me on, isn't it a ridiculous question to ask if you have a preference for one race or another in terms of voting? I don't think it's ridiculous. First of all, we started this whole conversation with the British guy where he was like, I do think we should have a lesser standard for detaining black people than detaining white people. You can listen back to the actual conversation and you can see where he says that. Now he tries to back away from it later, but I asked him a direct question. Would you have a lower standard for detaining black people than white people? And we said, if it saves lives, of course. That's what he said. You can watch the tape.
Would you be okay with, for example, there being a lower standard to stop black people than white people go?
Yes.
So you're in favor of, so just to be clear.
If it saves people's lives, yes.
Okay, so you're in favor of black people having a lower standard of stop than white people. This is where this kind of thinking gets. So when you ask, like, is this fascism? This is the kind of fascistic
It's not
thinking.
fascism.
I do want to
hang on. Sorry, Tim. I have to. It's not fascism.
So it was completely, I think, his own issue that race became a big talking point of the conversation. That's on him. And later he tried to back away from that and he's like, oh no, we're just noticing things. We're just noticing things. But I mean, you're not just noticing things. You did apply a different constitutional standard to black people than white people. You did suggest that. And you were trying to bait me from when I noticed that, like, yeah, there are some red states with with more crime than some of the blue states where they're proposing these deployments, even in the major cities. I mean, Chicago is not even in the top 10 in terms of crime. He goes, well, why are those red cities dangerous, or why do they have so much crime? And he wants to bait out of him, oh, because black people live there. Because
Goblin Studios says, why is anything else over? It's because, I hope I'm not sharing too much out of school, but Stephen Bennell II allegedly made homemade pornography with a bunch of his paramours, okay? One of them being a gal that him and I both worked with named Pixie. And he sent that, a homemade pornographic video, allegedly, to what he thought was an 18-year-old sex worker named Rose. Now, what ended up happening was Rose's ex-boyfriend, with whom she shot pornography, leaked Pixie's sex tape. And so as a result, Pixie is currently suing Steven under a new statute for like civil liability for leaked sex tapes. It's typically used in revenge porn, but the question is whether or not Steven can be held liable for it. And so we'll see. That civil case is pending. But one of the things that was revealed was that Rose was not 18 at the time of her shooting, allegedly. She was 17 and 4 months, I think exactly. And so as a result, she was creating illicit pornographic material and selling it on the internet. And Steven saw some of that illicit pornographic material and probably consumed it, not knowing that it was not an 18-year-old adult. Which is why you shouldn't be a fucking gooning dumbass, in my opinion. Sorry if that's a little harsh, but, it's fucking stupid. So, with that information being revealed within the past month, people have used that as a vector to harass Stephen and any of his friends or orbiters in order to socially isolate him. So he has no friends, so he has no professional acquaintances, so no one will work with him, so his brand is too toxic to be politically viable, probably in the hopes that Stephen either quits content or kills himself. That's what I would say is probably the goal. And so as a part of that campaign to digitally cancel Stephen, they started harassing Dan Saltman and Dan Saltman's family. And Dan Saltman is a multimillionaire who can spend the rest of his life. He can manage his businesses and play video games 8 hours a day. As far as I understand Dan Saltman's financial position, he can play Rust 8 hours a day and then manages his businesses as he sees fit. So since that was fucking with Dan Saltman's family, he stepped back from content because he doesn't need the money and he doesn't need the harassment.
Black people are inherently more, prone to crime. I think that's what he's pushing for. He struck me as someone who's like very anti-Muslim and very against immigration into the UK. And so that it kind of striking me as a kind of Tommy Robinson type outlook. I'm not saying that he agrees with everything Tommy Robinson does, but just in his outlook vis-a-vis immigration, other parts of the conversation.
Hasbar says, I guess I want to know what MAGA policies he really dislikes. I've watched Connor for nearly a decade, but I've missed a good bit. Tell me what MAGA policies are. Because for me, it seems like a pretty ham-fisted approach to immigration control. It seems like military isolationism, and it seems like economic protectionism. And I'm not really for any of those things. But if you want to articulate a strong MAGA policy that you think I would agree with, go ahead.
Oh, I thought it was very revealing that this Joel guy was like a presuppositional type person.
Well, hold on. This might be sarcastic. Sorry, there's actually a good point here. Bum number one says, oh yeah, Kamala would never cover up the Epstein stuff if she were in power. No, she probably would. Let's be real. Biden had an opportunity to release all the Epstein stuff. Obama probably had an opportunity to release the Epstein stuff. The reason why they didn't release it is because Bill Clinton and Bill Gates are implicated. Bill Gates is probably one of the richest men on the planet and one of the largest philanthropists. He's one of the largest full-on rapists on the planet. So destroying Bill Gates would be a big move. And then destroying Bill Clinton, who's effectively like a legacy hero of the Democratic Party, that would be a huge thing as well. So no, Kamala, you might be being sarcastic. Kamala probably would have swept for the pedophile stuff as well. But guess what? Kamala didn't fuck 14 to 17-year-old girls. So, like you're trying to make them equivalent, like, oh, well, they would both sweep for the pedophile ring. And we should fucking viciously criticize Biden, Obama, everybody who was involved, who knew but didn't do anything with it. We should viciously criticize those fucks because they not only did they cover, if they had been willing to destroy Clinton and Bill Gates, they would have saved the American Republic. But instead, they allowed their tribal love for Bill Clinton and Bill Gates to morally compromise them to the point that they were willing to let Trump run the country twice. So yeah, fuck them too, right? They're not as evil as Trump, but they're still bad.
These guys are like dime a dozen. We need to have like some kind of dialogue tree to deal with the presuppositional folks because it's so hilarious.
Sorry, real quick. Don't ban me, bro. I was breaking balls in the Destiny Trump pedophile shit. Didn't realize you were in a shitty mood. It's okay, Hasbar. I love you. Even if you get banned I'm not going to ban you. Even if a mod bans you, it's a temporary suspension. You'll be back tomorrow. Don't worry about it. And then just DM me on Twitter. No big deal.
And I was almost baited into having that conversation, but it's the same kind of people like Andrew Wilson who try to claim that like logic doesn't make sense without a God. God is objective, and without God, there can be no logic. The rules of logic and reason don't make sense absent a God, which to me is basically an unintelligible statement to make. And it's like very easy to make quick work of it. So he almost baited me into those presuppositional conversations. But I wanted to stay on message and stay on the point of the deployment, which frankly, we spent a lot less time on than I wished. If there was one thing that I think having even a little bit more discipline would have been better. I thought my demeanor was decent. I think my demeanor is always better in the studios than in the live audience context. You guys can tell me what you think. Some people, I saw some comments being like, you were too nice. I don't know the best way, and this will dovetail into my recap on the PrimeCayes conversation, the best way to deal with that critique. Because on the one hand, I get the critique, which I think is well-meaning, that you come off sometimes very shrill and too aggressive and too angry sometimes. And I think that's true. But then there are some people who I think in certain contexts wish I was like more harsh. And there were some people who felt that with the Tim Pool conversation, and there were certainly some people who felt that with the PrimeCayes conversation. Now, if you're asking my personal opinion, I thought that I was reasonably harsh against both of them. I mean, I am basically calling Tim Pool a dumbass authoritarian fascist guy, and I'm calling PrimeCayes complicit in that as well. And so I don't think that we can make the argument anymore that Pisco is going to treat lefties differently than MAGA people in the sense of it, like in the debate context, optically that much, right? Because optically, I feel like I come across as congenial in the Tim Pool conversation a little bit, though I'm pushing, right? Constantly pushing, constantly asking him questions, pressing him. Same thing with Prime. I think it's about me finding my balance, perhaps, and how to approach these conversations. But yeah, let me know in the comments if you think that I was too nice, too...
No. Pisco, I trust Pisco. I actually did DM him and I asked him if he wanted to chat. He said he'd be down around 11:45, so we're going to catch up after this. But the with Pisco, this is my ideal. I'm just going to say it openly. Like I'm trying to work in the background, but obviously working in the background just means having conversations with creators who have their own free will. So it's kind of like herding cats. And I have no power over these people. I don't have enough money to influence them. So all I can do is say, hey, we're kind of like professional associates who work in the same field. And yeah, you have more clout, money, and influence than me. But I think that if you did this, it would be a good idea, right? That's all I'm really capable of doing. However, I think that national ground game is the next step. Okay, we've talked about this. Sorry if I'm going on a yap and you don't know what my point is yet. I promise I'll get there. I'm tired. You're just going to have to forgive me. So right now, TPUSA is beating the shit out of the Democrats. And so this was the progressive victory model that was flawed, but I don't think that there's anything inherently like morally wrong with it. They had a creator side and they had a canvassing side. And so Kyle Illustrated and Pixie managed a dozen small creators, including me. And then Destiny and Vosh either fundraised or were the major clout behind canvassing events. Then some of us went to canvassing events to help build out the roster. And cumulatively, I would say between Destiny, Vosh, Xander Hall Wick, Hunter Avalone, me, Lycan, Hutch, Josiah, Lonerbox, etc., you're probably talking around 500,000 people who were motivated. There were 3 canvassing events with $40,000 doors knocked per event, 300 volunteers per event, initiatives in general election. And the 3 canvassing events had $100,000 doors knocked. The canvassing houses, which to my knowledge was like 90% Destiny's community, there were volunteers who lived in houses where their room and board was paid for 2 years in swing states. And they did local ballot initiatives and they did general election voting registrations. And they knocked on 250,000 doors. And then if you add in flyers, voicemails, phone banking, all that stuff, then you have 1.6 million voter contacts that PV achieved. And I think this is a laudable achievement, even though PV and the liberals are breaking now. If you don't know what I'm talking about, PV kind of said like, fuck Brianna Wu and fuck Destiny. Their social media person said, fuck Brianna Wu and fuck Destiny on social media, effectively. So anyways, this was the PV model, but the problem with the PV model is they spent a bunch of money trying to, facilitate new creators. And the only creators that I know of who have made it full time and been like super clouded up and done super well is Josiah and Lonerbox. Those are the only people that I know. And Lonerbox was already doing well before his affiliation with PV. And Josiah just took off like a fucking bottle rocket. So Josiah didn't really need PV, but PV might have helped him a little bit financially when he was a young gun, right? When he was fresh making content. You'd have to talk to him about the financials. I have no idea. But anyways, the point is that was the PV model. But PV wasted a lot of money, including on me, in reference to the small creator section, where realistically they just needed the big creators in order to facilitate the canvassing ops. Anyways, The point is that PV is getting its ass kicked by this model, which is the Turning Points USA model. Okay. Charlie Kirk a decade ago, and a lot of people laughed at him when he first started doing it. They're like, oh, the Koch brothers are only paying you 50 grand a year. What a bunch of cheapskate pussies who can't back a good idea. But Charlie Kirk didn't care. And what he did is he ground it out, and he found all the college Republican chapters in universities and colleges across the United States, and he built them into a single brand, the Turning Points USA brand. And so as a result, he effectively has diehard Republican volunteer chapters in pretty much every college and university, major college and university across the nation. And so as a result, because he's both a alternative media creator and someone who manages volunteer organizations and universities across the entire nation, he's probably a millionaire at this point. Not only is he a millionaire, but when the Republican Party will call him, the RNC is calling Charlie Kirk to mobilize his audience and his Turning Points chapters. The mainstream politicians talk to Charlie Kirk. So there's a reason why this model worked. And so Zico and Sanchez of National Ground Game / UnF America, she doesn't want to be a creator, but she wants to replicate the Turning Points model in that she wants there to be national ground game chapters in colleges and universities across the nation. And then she wants to have creators come in and do debate events in order to energize these chapters. And if the Democrats are serious about competing with the youth vote and competing with millennials and Zoomers, to me, this is probably the most important project that they could possibly take part in, which is why, even though I'm not being paid by them, not yet, and I'm not really doing anything except for just talking to other creators who I think would be good to create debate events for National Ground Game. This to me is like the next logical step. This is the most viable way, if you're talking about electoral politics, that Democrats and they're liberals, these people fucking beef with progressives the same way that I beef with progressives. This is the next step. So all of that to say, sorry I took you on like a 10-minute diatribe. Steven should be that creator, but he's so he has so much baggage. I don't know if he's going to be able to survive public scrutiny, whereas I think Pisco would. Now, does Pisco have the same clout as Destiny? Obviously not. He's at 23K. He's got 1,500 views. Posted 2 hours ago. He's a small bean, but does he have the talent? Does he have the charisma? Does he have the balls? Yeah. And so what I suggested to National Ground Game, what I suggested to Z is I said, why don't you have the Live and Learn crew, Josiah, because he's got cloud and metrics like a motherfucker. Why don't you have the Live and Learn crew be like your face, like come meet Josiah and come meet Pisco and come meet Hutch and come meet Soy Pill at your local university. They're doing a debate event where they're taking on all comers in MAGA and they're doing a panel afterwards. And then you could have Steven as the dark horse, as the villain, as the heel, come in for debate events when it's appropriate. And then hopefully what happens is like Steven's baggage becomes like less and less toxic over time. And then eventually he can be incorporated into it. And hopefully he stops fucking teenagers. That would be the ideal. But again, nobody's paying me. I just really, really, really despise Trump and everybody who's sweeping for him. And I want to hurt them bad.
Tim, or to the other people there, or to Prime, which we'll get to in a second. But I'm happy with how that went. I almost wish we had another hour. And it's not about like making sure I get invited back. That's not why I would say anything that's on my mind. It's about me trying to get to the right tone, perhaps, to be like the most effective in that moment. But I'm open to the criticism there. I had a couple snide remarks under my breath that people caught. But in general, yeah, let me know what you think in terms of the topic discipline, in terms of the optics discipline. Let's talk about the Prime conversation substantively.
Based.
So Prime is someone that I like, and similar to Tim Pool, behind the scenes, Prime and I, very, very friendly. I'm very friendly again with people like Crystal Ball, very friendly with a bunch of other different people who, we think differently on issues. But in general, I like Prime. We have a big disagreement on the merits of the election issue. I actually didn't know / forgot that he didn't vote for Kamala. I thought it was going to be a conversation largely about like chorus stuff, but it very quickly got off like.
Horatio says, Connor, if Hassan Piker wanted to prove the left the fight, he decides he will do a sparring match in just boxing, any influencer or peer or YouTube Twitch, would you be up for it? Yeah, absolutely. I'm 6'4", I'm 239 pounds. I could probably get in really good shape. The only thing that I would want to do is I do have a vertebrae that's out at my top, and I have a feeling if somebody hits me just right, and I've been punched in the face while having this injury too. I got punched in the face several times as a cop, but I have a feeling that if somebody clocks me just right, they could probably knock me out like a sack of potatoes and maybe even paralyze me. So I just want to make sure, like I would want to get clearance from a doctor. And I would want to do a lot of physical therapy and physical exercise to make sure my neck was as reinforced as possible before doing a boxing match. But if I had 6 months, yeah, absolutely.
On harm reduction, voting for Kamala type conversation. And frankly, it's a little bit of the same song and dance that you guys have seen among a lot of these leftist circles for years. Although this one was a little worse. Because say what you want to say about the Vanguard, they voted for Kamala. Say what you want to say about Hassan, at least people say that he voted for Kamala. Say what you want to say about Crystal, she recognized that it was, in retrospect, should have voted for Kamala. Say what you want to say about Kyle, same.
Sorry, you guys keep saying interesting stuff in chat. Bud123 says, so why are leftists making arguments that the Second Amendment protects people's rights to own guns, but also support gun control that would ban most guns? God, Bud123. Do you not engage with my content? I swear to God, you just come in here to say things that are frustrating to me. Bruh. This is, have you not looked at my graphs? Have you not looked at my drawings? What's wrong with you? All right, I'm gonna do a new drawing too, because I have an old drawing that I could just explain, but I think this is gonna be better. So these are leftists. These are progressives. These are liberals. And let's make them bigger. And then here's the, that's probably good. That's probably good. And then here's the, I guess what you would call like right-wing liberal hawks, what used to be neoconservatives that have jumped back over to the Democrats. All right, caps lock. Neocons, of which I am a part. Liberals. Progressives. And leftists. It's like you don't even pay attention. It's like you don't even love me, Bud123. It's like you don't even listen to what I say. I feel like a parent, like a disappointed parent who's like explained to their kids like 10,000 times the same things. Oh shit! Almost killed myself again. Interesting. Oh, I feel like a disappointed parent explaining some shit that should already be known to their child. So anyways, leftists are communists and socialists. Communists and socialists. Authoritarian communists / socialists want guns so they can do an armed revolution against the American empire. Libertarian communists / socialists want guns so they can protect themselves from bands of fascists / authoritarian right-wing crackdowns. Now, if I had to guess, like, how many people are actually, like, leftists in the United States, it would seriously be, like, I don't know, 2 to 10% of the United States. It's probably closer to, like, 2%, but they're really loud on social media, and they infect the national discourse all the time. So that's leftists. Progressives, I would say progressives who can be socialists or communists, but aren't necessarily socialists and communists. So I would say progressives split between wanting guns like leftists and wanting gun control like liberals. And I would say they're probably, I think they're estimated to be actually like 20% of the of the Democratic Party is estimated to be progressive or leftist. And so as a result, we can actually get an exact amount of how many people this is in the country. So we're at 330 million, which means that 110 million people are Democrats, and then 20% of the Democratic Party. So 110 million multiplied by 0.20 is 22 million. 22 million divided by 330 million is 0.06. So this is 6% of the American population. And I'll go ahead and say that leftists might be 10% of the Democratic Party, but I would say that they're only 2% of the they're only 2% of the population in general. I think that's accurate. I think that's fair. If you don't chew Big Red, then fuck you. All right, liberals are unironically like, so let's take out what is it? What was it? 22 million out of 110 million? 110 minus what was it? 22 million. So this is 88 divided by 330 million is 26%. So this is 26% of the total population, but this is like 80% of the Democratic Party. Want gun control because AR-15s are scary and liberals are pussies who don't understand violence or statistics. And that's why when anybody, like somebody calls me like a liberal or whatever, it's like, yeah, I believe in like maximal human freedom, but I'm not one of these guys. Absolutely not. Used to be Republicans love guns. Republican positions on guns. Yeah. So boom. And then I would say neocons are like, I don't know, maybe they're like 10% of the United States, and they're like, I don't know, they're not very much of either party because they're such a small block. But anyways, so that means that like leftists are, so whenever you hear, so why are leftists making arguments that the Second Amendment protects people's right to own guns, but also support gun control that wouldn't ban most guns? It's because when you say leftists, you are conflating leftists with progressives, with liberals, with neocons. And so as a result, all these people have different views on a single topic, and you're acting like they're all the same person, bro. So Pisco is, in my opinion, probably a liberal or a progressive. And so the reason why he's making like a pro 2A argument is because he probably does believe in guns for self-defense to some degree. And he does think that if trans people are going to be discriminated against within the United States, they should have the right to defend themselves. I think that's perfectly viable. I think that's a perfectly viable perspective, even to have as a pro gun control liberal. So ask me that question again when we start talking on stream. So I'll ask him what his gun control perspectives are.
Hey, Mick, so this is like almost even a worse version of that kind of lefty anti-democrat sentiment, which some versions of I can even sympathize sometimes with people who are like, we don't like the Democrats when they're doing X, Y, Z. But this was really just super synthesized, hyper concentrated version of what I would call lefty brain rot, even though I do like Prime quite a bit. So of course he's going to have a problem with Chorus if in general he has a problem with voting for Democrats, I think. Not
True.
suggesting that Chorus is a partisan organization in the sense of being officially affiliated with the Democrats, but everyone kind of understands ideologically the kind of creator is more center left than full on leftist, full on socialist or whatever. And so it got into a conversation about why it was not okay to vote for Kamala. And then it kind of gets down to the trolley problem, doesn't it? Where PrimeCayes takes this like kind of like, I think like hard to explain, perplexing deontological view that one must never vote for the lesser of two evils.
These words are way too big, bro. It cannot be. I have this cope that I say sometimes where I'm like, I'm too smart and I use too big of words in order to be popular, which is I'll just admit it. It's cope. It's cope. The reason why it's cope is because Pisco regularly gets like 500 to 1,000 viewers. And of course, like a substantive amount of them are like DGG, who liked Pisco in the first place and thought he was a good debate bro. And he's like he's a good replacement for Destiny when Destiny isn't live. So yeah, there's like definitely like he probably has some audience crossover with DGG, right? Even if him and Steven are not on good terms right now. But the oh shit, what was I thinking? I pulled it up, the PV thing. So Chorus effectively did the creator program, but to my knowledge, they have a shitload more cash. And what I mean by that is if you look at Brian Tyler Cohen, who I think is one of the founders of Social Blade, Brian Tyler Cohen. So I think he's not the only founder. There's multiple founders or whatever. But within the past 28 days, or 30 days, excuse me, it's still loading. Just giving it a second to load. I really need fiber internet. I think it's available in my area. I need to get it. While I'm waiting for it to load, Grassroots Hegemon, thank you for your super chat, brother. $20. Pisco can't join stream today. He's jackhammering the foundation of a poor black child's home in Chicago. Based. What a based king. All right, here we go. Should be loading. So he's got 4,218,000,000 views. So while we're waiting for that to load, I can just do the math on the 4 billion views. But for my Warhammer content, which is between 10 and 20 minutes, I get $200 for 100,000 views. So 4 billion views. So 100,000. So 200 times 4,218 is this dude has made almost $1 million off of AdSense alone. That's not to mention super chats. That's not to mention channel sponsorships. That's not to mention ad integrations. That's not to add in anything else. And what is it? He got, within the last 30 days, he got 100 million views. So 106 times 200. This guy made $20,000 last month, and that's on the low end. That's like a low end estimate. I know for a fact that another creator who's super successful told me that he got 20 million views one month and he made like 50,000. So 5 times, so 50,000 times 5. Brian Tyler Cohen made $250,000 last month. Okay. So this dude is just raking in cash, and he's not the only founder of Chorus, right? And so what Brian Tyler Cohen did in reference to the Chorus situation is they effectively, because they had shitloads more cash than PV did, is they tried to do the same thing that PV did with the small creator program, where they tried to reach out to people that they believed had some level of talent, who, if they were subsidized, could take a shot at content creation and become bigger and maybe roll that into becoming a more successful streamer. And truth be told, like, this success ratio is not bad. Having Josiah be the monster that he is, and having Lonerbox be the monster that he is, and then having Dylan Burns, who's undeniably a talented creator, and having Hutch being an undeniably talented creator. Hunter needs to find his pacing, but he wouldn't have 500,000 subs if he didn't have some kind of talent. He just hasn't found his pacing. If I was Hunter Avalon, I would start with a new channel. I'm not kidding. I would start from scratch. And then me, I like to think that I have some talent. I could be wrong, but I think I have some talent. I hope the 130 people who are hanging out with me today, I hope they think that I have some talent. Otherwise, they wouldn't be fucking watching. But what is it? Hunter Avallone. For those of you who don't know Hunter Avallone lore, Avallone. There's a really funny hip hop artist who's named Mickey Avallone, and he has this hip hop song from the thousands called "My Dick," and it's a hip hop song about how his dick is amazing, and it's a comedic song, and it's amazing. So look at this. Hunter Avallone has 500,000 subs, but 95% of these subs are conservatives who watched him when he was a conservative. So this is where you're not bored, you're addicted. 2K views. I genuinely think that Hunter Avallone would be better off saying, like, using the community tab. Where's the community tab? Posts. Going here, creating a new channel, and then basically putting his new content on a new channel in his community tab for his old channel. I genuinely think that would help him metrically. Anyways, I hope you're enjoying my attention deficit disorder streaming today. For those of you who don't know, I got 5 hours of sleep last night, so I'm all over the place, and I apologize. I might need to use the restroom again before I talk to Pisco.
Regardless of the consequence down the line. And that is like a kind of deontologic value that I could never truly understand. I mean, our minds just think very differently. It, at some points, feels a bit like a virtue signal.
It's not about, so my vote was not about who is better, a slightly lesser version of evil. It's, hey, are you for genocide or against it? Have you cleared that bar?
But let me run you down some of the, like, I think, problems with that conversation and what he's, quote unquote, trying to do in the conversation. Again, I'm not ascribing any ill motive to Prime at all. I'm just saying that these are the kind of patterns that I see.
Yeah, Bex asked for a Discord link. The Discord link should be permanent. So this should be good. Let me turn off streamer mode. And let me get you a Discord link.
In the conversation. The first is like this whole, well, she didn't deserve my vote. She didn't earn my vote. I want to say it,
which is very stupid.
Like, very clearly. I think people who use the term deserve your vote, or she needs to earn my vote, or she deserved to lose, I believe that to largely be either confusion or weasel language. I hear it from Prime. I heard it from Ryan.
It's confusion.
And Malala. You don't owe anyone your vote. One thing that's been very helpful by talking to people like Avi and Ask Yourself is getting an understanding of what people.
All right, I have to go use the restroom. I have to. So I'll be right back. I'm gonna let this play. We're gonna be talking to Pisco in 5 minutes, as long as he doesn't, hate to say it, but flake.
Mean by that term. When you say you don't owe anyone your vote, well, what do you mean by that? If what you mean is legally you don't have an obligation to vote for someone, then that I would say I agree. You don't owe anyone your vote in the sense that you are not legally bound. You haven't made a commitment that is enforceable, either in the law or I suppose socially, to vote for someone. So in terms of you don't owe, if what you mean by you don't owe someone your vote, as in like you don't have some kind of legal or promissory obligation to vote for someone, then yeah, I agree with that. But typically people mean something more. They don't mean that, right? They don't mean I have a legal obligation to vote for Kamala or I promised someone I would vote for Kamala. That's not what people mean by the term owe. They mean some other obligation. Like you're not owing Kamala Harris a vote in some other sense. Well, what is that other sense? If the other sense is like, do I have an ethical obligation to vote for someone? Then I think you do owe her your vote because you owe the most viable, in my opinion, like the least harmful, viable candidate your vote. If that's what we mean by owing someone vote, but like, what do you mean other than that? What do you mean by owe vote other than like ethical obligation to vote for someone? And once you start to clarify what is meant by these terminologies, this rhetoric starts to show its emptiness. The same thing with the kind of like, she deserved to lose. Well, what do you mean by she deserved to lose? And Tobias, Dr. Neerup says the best candidate is better wording. I would say the best viable candidate, perhaps. Because I wouldn't say like if you thought Jill Stein was the best candidate that you should vote for her. But so you have an ethical obligation to vote for them in the two-party system, the best viable candidate. But that's one area of like what I would consider, whether intentional or not, slippery or weasel language, this kind of deserves to vote, owed your vote. Whenever you hear that, that should be sending like alarm bells. because I think it's a way to like dodge the fact that everyone recognizes the lesser of two evils and to divorce that obligation that one would feel to vote for that lesser of two evils and to impose instead a kind of like candidate obligation. When we're not analyzing like the candidate's obligation, we're taking the candidate as given and assessing your obligation given a candidate. And so always be aware, I think, of that terminology. She deserved to lose. She didn't deserve my vote. I didn't owe her my vote. You don't owe anyone your vote. That is what I take to be kind of like weasel language. The second part here, and it's something that Joanna and I have discussed where she's been super influential on my thinking here, because she's writing a piece on genocide and we've had conversations about it, which is this kind of like totalizing view of genocide. And this is going to sound perhaps a little bit callous, but I don't mean it as such. I actually think it's a really important point. I tried to bring it up in the conversation. I don't know if it was lost, but, and again, I don't want it to sound callous. Genocide is not the only thing that matters. Genocide doesn't even necessarily require anyone to die by its strict legal interpretation. There are genocides in history that have been less harmful than other things in history. There are other evils and harms that need to be weighed. I don't know why your rule would be prevent genocide or vote against genocide, even if the vote, if actuated, wouldn't save you against a genocide, and even if there are other massive amounts of social ills that will come about by your actualizing the preferred outcome. And what I mean is, like, how do you weigh the genocide of the Gazan people against millions of deaths of starvation elsewhere, which are not genocide, or millions of deaths due to disease? It's not intuitive to me that the only thing that we should care about, to the exclusion of other things, is death by genocide. Not to say that we shouldn't consider.
Yep. It was a lesser of two evils calculation. That's what it was. Let me check. Pisco, let me know when you are ready.
And weigh actual or supposed support for a genocide in our voting calculation.
All right. And I do have to apologize a little bit, but I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to be super sensitive to going to the bathroom, because as somebody who was recently hospitalized with intestinal issues, I have no desire to go through that again whatsoever. So if I need to stay hydrated, caffeinated, eating fiber, eating roughage, and if I have to answer the call of the wild in order to advance, in order to avoid going back to the hospital, I'm going to do it. I'm not apologizing for it. So if you have more Counterpoints chair streams because I need to sneak off in order to handle nature's business, it's going to happen. Hans Meyer says, I have him since he is 10 weeks. Every time he felt fear as young dog, I stand before him. I face the thing he feared. Since every time he fears anything, he stands behind me. I tried to do German. It came out Russian. My apologies. Like the stream. Share it with your friends. Engage with chat. Super chats if you got them. Memberships if you got them.